welcome to the Southwest Climate Podcast, the May edition. Mike.
Hey, Zach.
How you doing?
I'm good. We're getting so close to the most wonderful time of the year.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this today, and I think the four most sought after words of weather enthusiasts in the Southwest have been said to me countless times already. You know what those four words are?
What's the monsoon going to be like? Wait, that's too many words.
What's the monsoon forecast?
Oh, that's even better. Yes, that's actually four words. It's the common conversation piece among my circles too.
How many interviews have you gotten so far?
I gave one this previous week, and the headline ended up being something like climatologist predicts that. No, we got to wait. Don't even say.
We're going to get to that. We got to make listeners stay tuned. So we're going to.
You already know what my forecast is, Zach. My forecast. I can make it 10 years out.
That's true. I do know your forecast, but we will talk about the forecast later because as Mike alluded to, we are there. We are on the precipice. The winter's behind us. We just have the doom season to suffer through the heat season before the monsoon comes.
And it wasn't even that bad.
It hasn't been that bad so far, which we'll also talk about. So yeah, Mike, this is I'm happy. We have a lot to talk about today. I'm happy that we get a chance to connect, and I'm also really excited about the next 3 months or the next 4 months. And hopefully, unlike last year, you won't be screaming at the skies for some rain. All right, so just a little bit about the outline for today. We want to sort of revisit the last 30 days, not a ton there, but like I mentioned, we're sort of in that ramping up, the heat season ramping up. So we'll talk a little bit about the temperatures. There was a little bit of rainfall to note. So we'll go over the last 30 days, and then we'll do a deeper dive into the monsoon, talk a little bit about this time last year and how it differs from where we are right now. And yeah, anticipate the monsoon with the monsoon forecast is how we'll end it. We might dive in a little bit to, fire or water if time permits. What do you think, Mike?
Sounds great, Zach. Thanks for being organized.
Okay, Mike. So as we expect at this time of year, there's not much weather in terms of rainfall to talk about, but there was a little bit in the northern parts of the Southwest, northern Arizona, northern New Mexico. Maybe take us through, if you can, what happened in the last 30 days in terms of the synoptic sort of weather patterns.
A lot of things can happen weather-wise in this transition season. So, we would consider, and we've talked about this for years now, but kind of April, May, and June, you're shifting from your winter weather pattern where you've got a lot of these mid-latitude storms coming off the Pacific Ocean, and the whole jet stream is, it's kind of, wandering around the Western U.S. and some winters, like La Nina winters, that storm track will park north of us and will leave us dry. Maybe it'll dip off to the east and, bring cold weather to the eastern U.S. And so we saw a lot of that earlier this winter. We had a La Nina winter. We did not have a lot of those precip events, but the overall jet stream kind of hung around kind of mid part of the Western U.S. So we didn't have a lot of really hot temperatures through the winter. It's quite moderate since November, December, January. It was warmer in the fall, but we get all the way through into this winter spring period. And the temps, we've had a couple of runs of hot days, but overall temps have been kind of near average. So April, May, June, this period has been very windy. We've had a lot of these storm systems continuing to drop down the West Coast and move through the Southwest. Sometimes they'll just kind of move across the northern part of Arizona, New Mexico. Sometimes they'll drop down on the east side of New Mexico and then give them precipitation and cooler temperatures. And so just in the last 30 days, same pattern, lots of weather systems moving across. We have not had strong ridging, which would give us those strong heat spells for any length of time. They've been kind of beat back. And a couple of those events, brought some precip to the northern part of the state and eastern New Mexico. And this actually extends up into Colorado too, has been pretty wet actually. And they've had a pretty strong rally in spring precip, basically east of Albuquerque. And you're kind of in the Great Plains part of New Mexico. And they've had some pretty good precipitation in the last 30 days.
Yeah, I was paying attention to Colorado and particularly the San Juan Mountains, and I believe mid-May they got quite a bit of actual snowfall up there, which is really helpful for the sort of really low stream flow projections for the spring and in the summer. So yeah, I think the San Juan's more than an inch and a half of snow water equivalent, so more than a foot of snow fell in parts of that. So that was really nice. And yeah, you mentioned, Mike, the sort of northern areas of Arizona also experienced some rainfall. And I'm looking at Flagstaff, the station at the Flagstaff Airport, Pullman Airport. Right at the end of May, a little bit of rain fell, let's say, I don't have the exact date, but probably like April 27th, somewhere around there, April 26th, something like a half an inch. And then also sort of mid-May as well, there was a little bit more, and helped a little bit. Flagstaff for the winter, as we've talked about ad nauseum, literally, is coming in at below average, as is all of the other. Well, I won't say all because I haven't looked at all of them, but if not all, a large fraction of the stations in Arizona are below average.
May is not the month that you expect to see much of any precip. The fact that we've had any in this kind of run of 18 months now of record hot if we go back to last summer, and then record dry if we look at the whole 18 months. The fact that we've had any precip, and like you're looking at some observations around Flagstaff, anywhere from like half inch to a little over an inch of precip in the last 30 days total. And you'll see that in kind of an arc from even the northwest part of the state through the Flagstaff, and then reaches over into parts of the east central part of the state. And not typical. So in real short-term drought conditions, that bumps up some of those drought indices. But then if you look at the longer window, it's not enough to make a huge dent. Probably what it's been helpful with is just taking a little bit of an edge off of some of the fire danger that we would have expected to see if, like some of the Mays have passed. Like if we would have had last May repeat with those really hot temperatures, the fire situation, I think, would be even worse. And it's not great right now. I mean, the fire danger is still really high, but having those, if we didn't have this more recent precip and we didn't have these cooler systems kind of taking the edge off the fire danger, we'd be in a really, really bad spot.
And if we're thinking about, though, climatology, the northern areas are wetter at this time of year in May. Even if it's not that much rain, it's more rain than we get as you move further south in Arizona and New Mexico.
That's right. New Mexico, kind of continental divide east, and especially the Great Plains, they actually do have more of a springtime maximum. So they can get quite a bit of precip in April, May. And then we have we typically dry out sort of March into April. Climatologically, like the southern part of the state bottoms out right at the end of May, beginning of June, and that reaches further north too. So earlier in May, you have usually a better risk of precipitation just from those trailing winter storms. And then they tend to lift north by the end of the month. And so as you get into the beginning of June, you're in that real core part of the whole Southwest drying out. And then you're really looking to the south for the building of the monsoon.
Yeah, and you also alluded to the temperatures, and they have been, even in the last 14 days, they've been actually below average for most of Arizona and western New Mexico, which has been kind of pleasant. And
it's been super pleasant, man. I can't even call it the doom season this year because it's not bothering me much at all.
One of the things that we track here is the number of days of 100-degree temperatures or above. And, last year we were tracking this because it ended up in Phoenix, it ended up becoming the highest number. Actually, both in Phoenix and Tucson, it was the highest number of days above 100 degrees or 100 degrees or above.
We got to get a shout out to Paul up at the Weather Service in Phoenix for pulling that data together.
Yeah, that's right. Paul did great work. And I'm looking at Paul's plots right now. And just to, I don't know, I mean, I don't really want to relive last year, but we ended last year in Tucson with 68 days total of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or above. And I think that was no, sorry, that's 68 is the average.
That sounded low.
Yeah, 108 was what we had last year. And the next highest it was like 8 or 9 days more than the previous high. In Phoenix, last year was 145 days, with the average being 111. So
right. And there's a special pathway to get to that number too. You have to start early in the spring, and you have to have the monsoon not show up. Like that's
kill the monsoon.
Yeah, you got to kill the monsoon to get that number of days. And so that's why you just won't see that every year. I don't think.
Right. And that's a good point. And so just looking at Tucson, last year we did start early. So the first day was like right before, it was the end of April.
Yep.
We've only had one day so far. And that was, it was mid-May. I don't have the specific date, but only one day so far. Last year at this time, we probably had around, we had 9 last year at this time.
By my calculations, these aren't official, but we've only had 2 record highs this whole spring. 2. Mm-hmm. We had one in early March where we reached up just about to 90, and then we had one in early April where we reached a little bit above 90. But since then, we've had runs of above average days, but not breaking any records.
So you mentioned this before. You said, we haven't had the ridge build in and really create those conditions for really hot outbreaks. What's driving that? Do you know?
No, I don't. I have no. I mean, it's something upstream, right? It's weather, probably.
Sometimes, I always want to know the reason for things, but sometimes in weather, it's it's just it's weather. It's like stochastic. It's hard to actually figure out what's driving what.
What would be the usual suspects? It would be, and it's what we normally point to, right, for seasonal forecasting. We kind of look backwards at some kind of is there some slow moving phenomenon that's creating a certain pattern to persist? And La Nina is neutral right now, and that was the biggest player. And it could be the Madden Julian oscillation has been active, so maybe that's part of some of the wave train. But it's been if you look at the weather pattern of the last 30 days, pretty progressive troughs sort of moving through. We had a couple of closed lows and even cutoffs, which are not uncommon for this time of year. And if they wander slowly, you can have runs of days where it's cooler than average, and it can even drop precip into the Southwest. And we had an event like that too. So it doesn't look that weird. And it's just a welcome respite from Mays like last year. And we've had previous Mays like that too, where the ridge builds in, it's super hot, and you're just baking all the way through end of May into June and then waiting for the monsoon.
Right. So in other words, it would be maybe the mechanism would be for many days or for outbreaks of really warm conditions, persistently warm conditions, would be that jet stream doesn't have its trough digging as deep south, as far south. So it's maybe there's few of the waves, right? Or that they're not moving as quickly, and or it's the troughs are just further north. So it's whatever is causing those conditions to happen.
Yeah, I think earlier in the season, you have to have an upstream trough, like a strong trough in the East Pacific to force a downstream ridge. And if that trough is persistent, the ridge is persistent, and then that can lead to those warm conditions. And as you progress through May into June, the whole northern hemisphere is warming up. So the whole jet stream is lifting north. And by the middle part of June into the later part of June, you end up having most of those dynamics really far north, and you're usually into a broad ridge across the continental US just because of land surface heating. And the cool Pacific has sort of a thermodynamic trough across it, and we're warmer, so we have a ridge across us. And so that's kind of the climatological pattern. And then if you get anything like noisy upstream where you're sending waves that are propagating, through the jet stream into the Western US, that can that's the weather kind of part of this, and it can move some of those things around.
So it kind of begs the question then of what the hemispheric temperature pattern has been like, right? And outside of just sort of our nook in the world, if the if the continent is warming up at a faster rate, then it's going to the jet stream itself would probably be retracted further north sooner. And is that more or less?
That's the kind of simple indication in the climate models is the temperature gradient from north to south moves north, right? And so that you have more weaker summertime circulations across the mid latitudes than you would in the past because you have less cold air driving that temperature gradient. I think it's more complicated than that, and the models are picking up on different things. And it's also, this kind of feeds into the wavy jet stream thing too, which we should talk about in a future podcast, because you sent that paper up too, that it's still very controversial. If Arctic sea ice extent decline is causing changes to the jet stream, and you're getting camps of papers that say it is and camps of papers say that it isn't. But that doesn't really necessarily have much, I don't think many implications for the summertime, because it's more of a wintertime phenomenon.
Did you check what the temperature was like across the US? Like we talked about it being cooler here in the Southwest, but I'm just wondering if that's been the pattern across the United States. Here, I can pull this up really quickly. It's kind of been cooler than average in the South and Southeast. It's been a mixed bag, and then warmer than average over the last month in sort of the Midwest and West and Northeast. So I guess like if you were to average this, it's probably pretty darn close to average. So it hasn't been like the last month hasn't been warmer than average when you look at the entire US.
That's always an indication that the pattern has been on the move and hasn't been persistent. If you get big geographic areas that are all hanging together, kind of north to south, east to west, then that would indicate that you've got some pattern that is not moving much, and then you may say you're in the cold part of a trough and the warm part of a ridge, but it's been moving pretty progressively across the whole country the last 30 days or so. So it's been, like you're saying, a mixed bag. And you've got, like those cool anomalies. It's been very wet and cool in the southern Great Plains, especially in the last 30 days. And New Mexico has had part of that pattern.
Let me just finish the points on the 100-degree Fahrenheit days. I stopped at Tucson, but Phoenix thus far has had 7 days. And this time last year, we were at 18 days. And the average for this time historically in Phoenix is 8. So we're running pretty close to average. Tucson, it's 3, and we've only had 1, so a little bit below average in that sense, but can turn around really quickly. But we'll take it, because as you mentioned, it's or you were talking about the precipitation in the northern parts of Arizona and New Mexico, sort of taking the fire, maybe a little bit of the risk away from the fire risk. But temperature also plays a role in that too, although there wasn't much precip to dry out in the first place. So might not matter all that much that we've had a slightly cooler spring.
Again, it's one of these that it could have been worse given the current situation. And so I think this little bit of springtime precip for parts of the region and the cooler temperatures is a pretty good outcome, given we're in kind of dire drought situation and, really accumulated long-term drought stress that's leading to some of this fire danger. So this is helping. We are right now recording before the Memorial Day weekend, which is a human ignition kind of centerpiece in the whole fire season for the Southwest. So I think there's still a lot of nervousness that we could have some big fires, and we've got to make it now, if everything works out with the monsoon, 4 weeks. And we've had big fires erupt right this time of year and burn very quickly, large acreage, very destructive, between now and July 1st.
That's right. And, we always talk about this, but, if the monsoon sort of varies by a week or 10 days, like in terms of its onset, and that can be, it doesn't sound like a lot, but in terms of fire, like a week is critical. It's an extra 7 days for landscapes to burn or to start. And if the monsoon, doesn't deliver in the particular place where the fire is or around the fire, then, it can go for a while. So,
yeah. And we get into that messy part of the season too, where we we go from, human ignitions primarily to lightning ignitions, which can be kind of common across the Southwest in kind of mid-June even, because we're getting buildups. We're getting a little bit of that early season moisture. We don't have any rain yet. And since the landscape is so parched, and a lot of these, if you get lightning strikes on dry trees, it's really different than on wet trees. And so, they tend to turn into fires more readily.
Yeah, so that's a good segue into just thinking about where we are now, and then maybe in relation to last year. And we're in two very different places. And hopefully we also have two very different outcomes.
Yeah.
But at the end of April last year, we had just come off like basically a winter season where we for the most part of the Southwest, that when you look at an indice that combines both precipitation and temperature, sort of an aridity index, we were in, let's say, above average conditions for that. Whereas this year, it's not right around average. It's much below average, obviously from driven mostly by the rainfall, or at least in large part by the low rainfall. So in terms of rainfall and temperature combined, just looking over the last 6 months, it's a much different situation. And then when you compare those 2 years and you look at the last 12 months, so taking not only the last winter, but the monsoon before that into account, it's even a worse picture now than in comparison to last year.
Yeah,
obviously, because last year's monsoon was terrible, and this winter was terrible as well. So, in terms of those two metrics, boy, Mike, it's kind of like we really need the monsoon. I think in terms of drought, in terms of fire, in terms of everybody's sort of, including your mental psyche, to really deliver it. And honestly, it's like sending to the batter's plate your number 7 hitter.
I know that's a good analogy. It feels like one of the highest stakes kind of pre-monsoon periods that, I've lived here for 20 some years, and, I don't remember, we haven't seen we can look at the data, and this hasn't happened in the historical record anyways. And especially that convergence of you got that climate change signal on the temperatures last year, the monsoon not showing up, this extended, co-occurring with a La Nina winter the following. It's just like a cascade of terrible climate things happening in the Southwest all at once. And so then it leads us to, like you're saying, like what happens next is pretty high stakes.
Right. And so I was like, okay, well, what are some of the things that we might think about what the monsoon may look like this year, right? And again, in this sort of comparison framework. And so one of them is the snowpack conditions, which again, we've talked about before, and it has sort of like a weak relationship with the onset of the monsoon. But looking at snowpack conditions around the West, particularly to our north and northeast, it's not much different last year than this year, quite frankly. And so I'm not sure that there's much difference there that we can sort of draw on that might tip the balance one way or the other. And then I also looked at sort of what ENSO looked like last year, and we were coming out of a borderline El Nino last year. And at this time, temperatures in the Pacific Ocean were still slightly above average. Whereas this year we're coming out of a La Nina, and temperatures are slightly below average. There's not much difference between last year and this year in terms of the temperature anomaly. One's above average and below average, but they're still pretty close to each other. So I'm not sure if there's much there we can also draw on. I don't know if you have any different thoughts.
No, I mean, I was trying to look for anything I could latch onto with respect to, anything kind of larger scale forcings, and we're back into neutral conditions, and that doesn't. I mean, there's not any systematic long-term, relationship with monsoon start, or the timing of monsoon start, or the vigorousness of July precipitation or total seasonal precipitation with neutral conditions. And it's only when you get into sort of subsets of La Nina or El Nino years, you do start to see a weak correlation emerge with, the timing of the onset of the monsoon. So we're really grasping at straws right now. And we end up looking at the seasonal dynamical models very, very carefully and closely to see if we can kind of see anything consistent come out of them. And there just really isn't anything there.
Yeah. Before we get there, because I do want to unpack that a little bit. Can we rely on June?
No. If you're in New Mexico on the Great Plains side, you got a much better chance because it's more in your climatology. But Western New Mexico and Arizona,
we can't rely on June. But I did want to go back and look at what average statistics look like for Tucson, Phoenix, Flagstaff, Albuquerque, and Las Cruces in terms of June. So I'll just throw some numbers out. For Tucson, it's actually quite interesting. The maximum, and so I was only looking at the period from 1960 onwards. The maximum amount, Mike, was actually higher than I thought in June. But there's a caveat here because June also covers the early onset of the monsoon period, and so I didn't dive into the actual years and when the rain comes. So most of the rainfall is likely coming in the latter half of June, but. Take a guess. What do you think the maximum amount of rainfall is at the Tucson airport over that 80-year period or 60-year period?
I kind of cheated because I looked at some of this data, but it's over 1.5 inches.
Yep. You did cheat.
It's the actual number.
1.6 inches.
Yeah.
Yep. And that was actually recent, 2016. Also, though, a fair number, about a quarter of those 60 years, so a little bit more than a quarter, 17 of those 60 years, had zero rainfall. So it's pretty common, if you will.
Okay, wait, did you say 17 of 60?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's much lower than I thought. I thought there'd be more zeros. So that's actually interesting. That's really, it's all interesting. It's not actually interesting now, but
yes, I thought that was lower too. And so I looked at just the last 10 years, 11 years actually. And only four of the last 11 years had zeros. So last year, it's basically a zero. It was 0.05 inches. 2019 was zero. 2018 was close to an inch. 2017 was zero. 2016 was 1.6 inches. 2015 was a little over half an inch. 2013, 14 were basically zero. 2013 had a trace amount. And 2012 had a third of an inch. So
it's really interesting. Yeah. And what's the median precip?
The median is 0.05 inches. So
okay.
Yeah. Low amounts. But you can get 2016. Do you remember 2016? Was that, I think Ben brought this up. Was that Hurricane Bud or not? Tropical Storm Bud?
Yeah, I think it was. I think, that was we had a run of years where we had the East Pacific was warm and we had pretty active East Pacific season. It was impacting us in the early part of the monsoon and also the late part of the monsoon. And it really boosted some of the seasonal totals.
And then last year, right, we had the too soon. There was a series of days, I think in early June, that felt like the monsoon, right? You remember that?
Yes, that's right. And it was such a fake out for the rest of the summer too. It was right at the beginning of the month.
Yeah, it was in the beginning. And I believe we got some precipitation. Again, I was just rattling off data from the airport, which, is just one point in a...
Right.
Yeah, so let me just do a few others really quickly. Phoenix, more than half the days, 39 out of 60 had zeros. But it also had a max of actually more than Tucson, 1.7, and that was in 1972. So that's pretty substantial. Flagstaff gets more rain than obviously than Tucson and Phoenix. Has about a fifth of the days, 20% of the days with or 20% of the Junes with no rainfall. So yeah, June can happen. Likely, if it does, it's a harbinger or an indication of the early onset of the monsoon. But there's these rogue storms that do happen, and we'll take it, but we can't count on it at all. And I think the listeners will obviously know that. So
yeah, and it just like you said, Zach, it's kind of a noisy month because you can get precip even in the later part of the month that's not necessarily the onset of the monsoon. It can be kind of like, it can still be some of the storm activity from mid-latitude storms. And I think that's what I remember last June, Zach, was like right after Memorial Day, beginning of June. It was sort of a deep trough that was off the California coast, like pushed up a bunch of early season moisture. And it felt, it's like you got real humid, but it was part of that storm track that messed with us the entire summer and really ruined the kind of the establishment of the persistent monsoon ridge. So and again, it's not like if it happens in June, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll stick around. Last summer was kind of a really weird, special exception, I think.
All right, before we talk more about what we think the monsoon's going to look like, or what we hope the monsoon will look like, I've kind of had one eye basically through Twitter on like the fire situation here, because, we've talked about this throughout the winter that, with the low rainfall conditions, that fire risk will be on the upswing. And it is, it's by all accounts, it's above average fire risk. But I haven't noticed a ton of fire activity. And I know there's been a few, Mike, and you spend more time in this community talking with people. And what are you hearing about the fire risk? And are you surprised at all that there isn't more activity?
I've been surprised that some of the fires haven't taken off and gotten bigger than they actually ended up being with the wind. We've had some really strong wind events, and some of these fires were occurring during wind events. And so I think that the response has been pretty amazing. Like the different firefighting agencies have been like on stuff like right away, and they're getting air support to these fires really, really quickly. You're hearing about fires occurring, and within an hour, there's a very large tanker, hitting these fires. So I think that there's extreme readiness down here. A lot of the fires have been kind of lower elevation and burning through dry grasses, and have been, a lot of them been caused by like car fires. So there's been kind of that aspect. There was a fire in Baghdad, Arizona. It was really pretty tragic. It started on the south side of town and ended up burning through dry brush and burned 13 houses down, so that was it's very destructive. Like we don't have a lot of fires like that where it burns down parts of towns. So that really stands out, I think, as, a real impact of this particular fire season. And thankfully we haven't had any of the higher elevation, heavy fuel, heavy timber fires that have burned through, like the Wallow or any of the bigger ones. So that to me is good. Maybe the weather has really helped. The recent precip of the last 30 days, maybe that's, helped with some of these higher elevations, take the edge off a little bit.
Given a situation, this is probably a question that doesn't have a definitive answer, but I'm just curious, like, so yeah, we had a few events that maybe dropped, let's say a half an inch of rainfall, but given how dry it was, and then that, it's short-lived, like how much does that really damp the fire risk? Are we talking like, maybe it suppresses it a few percentage points, a couple days, and then it's right back to where it was? I mean, any way to sort of like think about the impact of like just a small event?
And I'm a little out of my lane. I used to know more about this, and I may misspeak slightly, but I think conceptually this is close, is that there are fuel models that fire meteorologists and fire managers use that are like, there's 10-hour fuels, 100-hour fuels, and 1,000-hour fuels. And so like 10-hour fuels are very, very fine. And
like small, like shrubs and grasses,
right?
Things that dry out in 10 hours.
Exactly. Right. And so you've got these response times. And so heavier fuels take longer to wet up and they take longer to dry down. So it's basically, they're like kind of like climate timescales. And so those fine fuels can very quickly become very flammable and very quickly lose their flammability, but then return. And so you can have these events that in the very short term reduce the fire risk, but then it can jump back up again. And so I think knowing that it doesn't take much for us to heat up, get windy in June, and have that fire risk return, even in the heavier fuels, because and it's also has to do with live fuels versus dead fuels. And so if you kill off a lot of trees with drought conditions, which there's been a lot of mortality in pinyon juniper, there's now new standing dead fuels, which doesn't have its own fuel moisture associated with it. So there's a subtle, I think, kind of background dynamic that if you can keep the relative humidity high, keep the temps a little bit lower, which they're related, and then have some precip kind of come through, it really does. And you're just trying to cut the time between now and the onset of the monsoon moisture. It doesn't even have to rain necessarily. That'd be helpful. But even the humidity coming up later in the month can help reduce the fire risk. So, if we can get through week by week by week, get close to the monsoon, then we close that window.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's kind of like, just like a small atmospheric or environmental condition change could have a relatively larger impact on fire potential. They're not one-to-one, in other words.
That's right. Yep. They're not one-to-one, and they're nonlinear, and they're pretty dynamic through time. And, wind can override in some situations, and then heat can override in other situations. So it's kind of this interplay. And, you're looking for the monsoon ridge to kind of build north to bring us into that. So to get to the moisture on the other side, you actually have to go through this period of real fire danger on the way there. It's hard to shortcut it.
That's right. That's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, you actually have to go through the gauntlet.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to run the ridge gauntlet
to come out the other side.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess you want to do it for as short a time as possible. And the monsoon ridge, I mean, it's not like a thing that takes a certain amount of time to ramp up, right? Like it can evolve pretty quickly or slower. So
yeah, and there's always this concern when you watch the weather in May and even into early June, where you're not seeing the ridge build. And I had this thinking many years ago, but then we've been through enough springs where it turns on a dime that you can go from this kind of cool spring pattern into a pretty persistent monsoon ridge at the end of June very, very quickly. And it doesn't what happened earlier in the month doesn't necessarily portend doom, for the beginning of the monsoon. But we've also had springs where that pattern did linger and it did mess with it. So it doesn't have a lot of, forecastability, I think.
So that raises a question. Does the Climate Prediction Center forecast portend doom? I'm doing a lot of good teasing today. I think.
It is. You really are.
Had like a commercial after this break. So what's our official forecast, Mike?
Well, the official forecast for the Southwest right now for July, August, September so this was issued on May 20th. So the July, August, September Climate Prediction Center precipitation outlook is the eastern half of Arizona and all of New Mexico has a slight lean towards below average total seasonal precipitation. It's the lightest shade of brown that they have on the map to indicate
I don't even look at the numbers. No, I don't even look at the numbers because we don't need to get into the nuances of them, but they are shifting probabilities between three categories. So like Mike was saying, it's a slight lean toward below. It's not even below average. These things are hard to communicate.
It's right in the bottom tercile.
Bottom tercile. So that's why I don't even look at the numbers. I just look at the signal, which is for below average monsoon rainfall. But Mike, should we believe them?
Should we believe
All
them?
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to have any tenets of faith associated with it. Yeah. Is it useful? I don't think it is particularly useful. The forecast has had kind of an interesting journey through the spring. Is that there was and I'm pulling up the interactive map, and the west side of Tucson is in equal chances. So what's equal chances, Zach? Equal chances is
in the east side where you live. It's below.
Yes.
Oh, that's the cutoff. That's the line. Anything east of Mike Crimmins' house is below.
Oh, Zach, you know what? It's I-10. I'm sorry. It's U2.
Yeah.
It is U2.
Yeah. No, you were saying, I think you were going to say something interesting, which is a rare occasion. So I want to.
I don't think it's that interesting, but I'm pulling up the interactive map. So the Climate Prediction Center with these forecasts has an they have the map. You can just look at the colors and where they are, but they have an interactive map where you can click on your location and actually see what the forecast probabilities are. So Zachary, so this is my son's name, Zachary. So I just called you, basically, I gave you your full title. The July, August, September,
my mom.
Yeah, I know exactly. That's what it felt like. I felt like I was talking down to you as a dad. The July, August, September seasonal outlook for Tucson, where I clicked on my house. So the normal precipitation is 5.53 inches. The probability of being above normal is 33. The probability of near normal is 33. The probability of below normal is 34.
Yeah,
there's a 1% shift in the odds towards the lower tercile for my house this summer. So that's important for us to unpack, is that is not a confident forecast. That is a forecast that really doesn't communicate anything other than equal chances.
Right. We don't know.
We don't know. I mean, I can click on this for like Albuquerque. So the shift at Albuquerque is a little bit stronger. So that it's a shift now from a 30% chance of being above normal to now a 37% chance for being below normal. You can see where the math worked out, where they moved some of the chance of being above into the below, and near normal is 33. So, I mean, but again, that's not very strong either.
Right. So what do you say in those 4 interviews when people, like the 4, most sought after, most stated words at this time of year is, what's the monsoon forecast? Like, what do you say?
I said, I don't know. I did say, what I said though, is that it's very probable that it'll be better than last summer. And that's
a great forecast. That is a great forecast.
But and again, it's
certainty.
Right. It's not 100% forecast either, right? I mean, there's nothing to prevent the atmosphere from giving us another one of those monsoons. And the dynamical models are all over the place. When you average them up in these multi-model ensembles, you get this kind of dry Great Plains that has been creeping into New Mexico. None of the models are very strong in their anomalies, like with, like Real Gusto, they're saying, oh, there's a strong signal. And when you average up a bunch of weak models together, you get a weak forecast with a lot of uncertainty. So again, the summer's hard at the seasonal timescale.
Yeah. And I think that's the point. That's whenever I get asked a question, I mean, I say the same thing. Maybe I even say it stronger, that if anybody tells you they know what the monsoon is going to do, probably don't believe them.
Right.
Because I think it's really hard to forecast the monsoon. And we've talked about this a lot, because it's a phenomenon in our area that is on basically the northern margins of the monsoon phenomenon. It's like centered around the Sierra Madre Occidental in Mexico. And so that just itself means that it's more subjected to, it doesn't take much for some other influence to affect the monsoon. And there's a whole bunch of dynamics associated with it: wind, humidity, temperature, cloud feedbacks, land surface feedbacks. I mean, it's all wrapped up in a really complicated system that makes it really hard to forecast out. Doesn't mean we don't want it.
Right. I mean, yeah. So June is the beginning of the time period where we look south. We're going to watch what happens in Mexico, because, that's the beginning of the beginning of the subtropical ridge. They should start seeing thunderstorms. You should start seeing a green up response, where there's going to be a land surface feedback that's going to creep north. We're also going to pay attention to the Gulf of California sea surface temperatures, because there's a pretty good indication that in some past research that the Gulf of California actually has to warm up to, 88, 90 degrees Fahrenheit to actually start to destabilize and, release some of or be able to push some of its moisture into the low-lying atmosphere that can then turn into Gulf surges. That'll be important, throughout the monsoon season at the beginning. And the East Pacific tropical storm season can also be part of it can catalyze some of these early season events. And there's already some activity just south of Mexico and you're seeing them kind of spin up on the longer forecast. So there's stuff that's kind of falling in line, but again, it's too early to know if it's going to, show up, the week of the 20th in June, or if it's going to wait to the later part. And, we're going to be kind of at a wait and see. And we always are.
Yeah. And also how they will in some total add up to, because right. Again, we're talking about the entire July, August, and September season. And there might be periods within that season. I go back to I always bring this up, the halcyon days of, I think it was 2017, that 3 weeks in July, that was just epic, and that was basically it.
That 2017, where you and I were just like on cloud nine, it was pretty localized. The whole Southwest didn't see a lot of that activity. And it, like you said, it stopped. August and September were very quiet. So it was like, and that's not a bad way to get your monsoon precip. It's better if it's even and you get some later season events as well. But, in a monsoon season, even good monsoon seasons, there are still places that get left behind. And that's fairly common unless we have the big soaker events associated with large organized activity, related to tropical storms or big easterly waves. But in kind of the normal sort of isolated convection and thunderstorms, there are going to be locations, even if we hit average across the region, there'll be spots that don't get the precip. And that's a rough stretch then to have summer on summer with this winter in between, so this monsoon needs to overperform to really heal up some of the damage that's accrued in the short term.
You gave the CPC's forecast. I mean, they generate that by looking at a bunch of information, including a number of different climate models. It's not based on any one tool. It's based on a number of tools. It's
an expert system, right? So it's a forecaster who's assimilating, synthesizing, and interpreting statistical and dynamical models. And they're in a tough spot with the monsoon first off. And then in a situation where there's weak sea surface temperature forcing, the models really don't have much to grab onto.
So one of their tools, the dynamical modeling tools, I'm looking at right now, and there's 6 different models that go into that, they sort of collapse into one. If you look at just individually those models, I always look toward the sort of Sierra Madre Occidental just to see what the signal looks like there. And, it's a mixed bag. There's some of the models that are showing a wetter signal and some of the models that are showing the drier signal. And the only thing that I take away from this is basically reflected in the forecast that you talked about, the CPC's forecast, which is that there isn't a clear signal. And I'm not sure that there is ever a case in which all of them are pointing dry or pointing wet, but probably there's cases where 4 of the 6 are, or 5 of the 6 are, and here it's sort of split. So I think we've got it all on the table, Mike, which I'm happy about.
Yeah, I mean, it's now a wait and see.
All right, Mike, what's your forecast
for what?
The monsoon.
The whole monsoon?
Give it to me.
I thought I was gonna block that behind my online forecast for Fantasy Monsoon.
Good. So you're not going to reveal it. I should plug that. So we've been saying this for the last couple podcasts, and I'm going to say it again because we're nearing completion of our monsoon. We're calling it the Southwest Monsoon Fantasy Forecast. So everybody wants to know what the forecast is going to be, and this is your chance to actually make the forecast yourself and see how well you fare relative to other people who are making the forecast. So we've got this really cool interface that we're hopefully going to send out in emails and broadcast that allows you to sign in, allows you to make a forecast. You have to make a forecast we're doing it by month. So for July, you would make the forecast a week before July 1, so that you can't actually look and game the system by looking at the weather forecast for the 7 days. So you have to do it a week before the first of the month. And you do it at 5 cities, Tucson, Phoenix, Flagstaff, Albuquerque, and El Paso. And you get points based on how risky your forecast is and how accurate your forecast is. So the riskier your forecast, the less likely it'll occur, the more points you can score. And then that's scaled by how accurate your forecast actually is. And so you do that for each of the 5 cities, each of the 3 months, and we'll have this running score leaderboard that'll allow you to see how you're doing relative to other people. And we even got some prizes, some cool weather stations that we're going to give to the top finishers. So be on the lookout for that. We'd be really psyched for people to play along. It's just a way that we think just a way that we can engage with other weather enthusiasts, other people that care about the monsoon, and yeah, see if like we can beat the equal chances that the CPC forecast, Climate Prediction Center. So look out for that. We're super excited about that. And so you're not going to reveal your entire forecast, huh?
All right, I'll just give you a hint. It's somewhere between, for Tucson, somewhere between 4 and 6 inches. Yes, Ben just named it. That's actually the middle tercile.
Okay, you're going with the middle tercile. So it's going to be better than last year.
Yep.
I hadn't even thought of mine because it is relevant because what you think the final tally will be is kind of your strategy for how you think the months will unfold, but not entirely. I mean, last year, for example, by September, I mean, I was bullish in July and I was even bullish in August because I was like, look, it can't be this bad and it can't be two bad months in a row, but by September, I was like, it stinks. Like I'm going to just do a forecast of persistence.
Every corner was a surprise last summer. Like that whole idea that it just can't continue to be as bad as it was like, it was unbelievable, quite honestly.
So Mike, I also wanted just to prelude maybe something that we should talk about one of these upcoming, maybe the August podcast. People have probably seen, there's been a number of articles talking about the water situation and the water levels in Lake Mead are forecasted to be below a particular elevation that actually triggers water conservation that's built into this 7-basin in Mexico agreement, this interstate water agreement. And they're also, in addition to that, they're also, I think, negotiating more water, how to deal with drought going forward. So the water situation, Mike, it's an important topic, obviously, in the Southwest. It's also a super complicated one that you and I aren't like, we know the big picture, but we don't know the details. But I think it's worth, when the Bureau of Reclamation issues their 24-month forecast, which is basically what determines, and they do that in August. They do it every month, but the one in August is particularly important because it's what determines enacting the agreements, or it's what triggers the shortage agreements that were negotiated. So the 24-month study that's issued in August is the key one. So I think we should maybe try to unpack that for listeners if we think wrap our heads around it.
Oh man, for 20 years I've been trying to understand the water side, and I just throw up my hands because it's so complex. And even just on the climate side, it's complex just to try to understand all those pieces fit together. But yeah, I'm really interested in trying to understand that a little bit more. And then it'll be interesting to see how the monsoon has evolved and where it's put down precip, because we know that, decent monsoon precip through the monsoon season and into the fall can really help with stream flow runoff in the following spring. And so there's a lot of complexities there that I think just on the climate side will be kind of interesting to talk about. And then we've got there's this specter of another La Nina emerging for this fall and into next winter, which would impact the lower part of the basin probably more than it would the Intermountain West and the upper basin. But again, those outlooks are really, really uncertain this time of year because we're in that springtime period. So there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff through the summer, the basin study, and then this other ENSO element to talk about as well.
All right, let's go. I like it.
Let's do this.
All right, Mike. I don't know, any final parting shots? I think I've exhausted my my ability to communicate right now.
It is Friday. It's beginning of Memorial Day weekend, and just everybody be safe. Don't start any fires. And we just got to hang in there for a couple more weeks and see how this monsoon starts up.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And hopefully our next podcast will drop as rain is falling in the early onset of the monsoon. So let's hope for that.
Fantastic. Yeah. Love it.
Cheers.
Well, all the NPR podcasts, they started having people interviewed over Zoom. So it sounded just like everything else. It sounded like every meeting I had all day long.
Lowered the standards. All right, we can edit that one out. Or not.
Yeah. I had some dark places.